Hello, this is Sergio Marrero, and today we're here at RBL1 Live with Ablorde Ashigbi. He is founder and CEO of 4Degrees. Thanks for joining us today, Ablorde.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
It looks fantastic in Chicago right now, according to your your video. Um, before we just kidding around. But before we dive in, I'll share a little bit more about Ablorde. He's an investor and also a founder. He graduated from Harvard University undergrad. He's a World Economic Forum global shaper, and then also a TechStars alum. So we're excited to have you today. Also, not to mention, one of the entrepreneurs that has also raised over $1 million in venture capital funding. So excited to hear more about 4 Degrees and your journey of raising, and then also the lens of investing. So thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, no, really excited to be here, and it's definitely been a journey.
Awesome. So, well, without further ado, let's dive right in. If you can share with us a little bit more about 4 Degrees.
Sure. So think of 4 Degrees as an intelligent product that's built to maximize a team's most important asset, which is the relationship network that surrounds them. So technically, the way to think of it, it plugs into communication channels like email, calendar, other third-party systems where relationship data that your team has may reside. We use that to get an understanding of who your team is connected to and communicating with, and then apply a bunch of technology that we built on top of that to essentially give a team back three things. So the first is an enriched Rolodex that you can use to figure out your best path to a given company or person through your team's relationship network. We've built some relationship strength detection. We've built some categorization that you can use to slice and dice that network by a bunch of different dimensions. The second is that we go and search the world for news and information about those people and those companies. So yeah, if they've shown up in the news recently, if they've published content, if they've changed jobs, if you're applying to their city, if they've done deals you should be paying attention to, we're trying to pick all that up and surface it. And then the last is a set of intelligent recommendations and notifications that you can use to leverage that network to your advantage. And so, yeah, that product is primarily sold into a set of financial services and professional services and other heavily relationship-driven industries.
Great. So the main customer for so yeah, can you describe a little bit more? Who's the main customer for 4 Degrees?
Yeah, so we broadly think of it as like relationship-driven industries. So I think private equity, venture capital, investment banks, some M&A teams, all of those tend to be like core, like down the fairway customers for us. And over time, the kind of mandate of the base of customers we talk to continues to expand.
Great. I'll share a little bit more of the product here. And the different companies that come to you. Can you share more about what companies should think about using 4 Degrees?
Yeah, so I would say if you're a venture capital fund, if you're a private equity fund, if you're an investment bank, or if you're a consulting firm, those tend to be kind of right down the fairway as customers for us. The reason for that is that those businesses rely on and essentially revolve around the relationship network that surrounds them. And so we tend to be really good solutions for them to both organize that network and then in other cases be able to organize the list of companies and potential opportunities that they're using on their day-to-day business as well.
Awesome. Um, I know that you've been through being through TechStars. TechStars like the creme de la creme of startups. If you can share with us a little bit more of the journey, what led you to, for people that don't know you, you worked in consulting, you became an investor and then now a founder. Can you share a little bit more about your journey and what led you to start 4 Degrees?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I spent my career in what we would describe as like relationship-driven industries. So I started out as a consultant at Bain & Company, learned a ton from being a part of that organization, getting a chance to work with large Fortune over 500 clients and a number of folks who were further along in the professional journeys than myself. From there, I was lucky enough to get the opportunity to join a venture fund based here in Chicago called Pritzker Group. So investing primarily at the Series A and Series B, spent 3 years there, a bunch of phenomenal people, and got a chance to meet a bunch of great entrepreneurs. And from those experiences, one of the things that became clear to myself and my co-founder were just, again, how heavily relationship driven those worlds were. So in venture, for instance, sourcing deals, doing diligence, helping portfolio companies raise that round of capital through syndicating out to other investors. And then once we were invested, actually helping those companies find customers and talent and next round investors was a function of the relationship network that surrounded the firm. And yet most of the products and tools that existed weren't really built to handle kind of the importance of that relationship network. Similarly, in consulting, remember, we have these large Fortune 500 companies that are making multi-million-dollar decisions about which consulting firm they want to go with. And the relationship was the thing that ultimately differentiated which decision they made. And again, those relationships were largely held in systems that were built for traditional sales teams. And when those didn't work, then in Excel spreadsheets or Evernote notes or on whiteboards. We saw an opportunity to take essentially that process out of the Stone Ages and bring it into a set of intelligent systems that understood both the importance of those relationships and provide a set of tools to help them manage those more kind of essentially in a more automated, but also like authentic way. And so that was kind of the genesis for at least the version of 4Degrees that's out in the world. The second piece that I would at least kind of point to is I think most companies not only need to have a clear kind of commercial vision and something that drives like a real business opportunity, but at the same time, something that fundamentally makes you excited to get up every day and work on this problem. And so for me, like I'm the son of two West African immigrants. They landed here in the US, and I've seen members of my family who don't have a ton of professional connectivity and whose lack of professional connectivity directly translates into the kinds of opportunities that come their way. And I think that's just true of our society. Is a lot of the jobs you get, the opportunities you get in life are in large part a function of the people that you know. And so we see an opportunity to fundamentally change the way people manage those relationships and the relationship networks that create opportunities for them. And in doing so, like change people's professional trajectories over time.
Great. Can you share, that's clear on how you ended up starting 4Degrees, but what did you have the idea for 4Degrees when you left consulting, going into Pritzker Group and to be an investor, or how far back did the entrepreneurial itch strike you?
What's interesting is I don't think I walked into even venture believing that I was going to leave venture and become an entrepreneur. And if anything, I feel like if there's something you learn from venture, it's actually how hard it is to build a company that works. Like the vast majority of companies founded like really smart people with really great ideas, like fundamentally don't like hit this large scale outcome that everyone's shooting for. And so kind of as a result, I remember thinking to myself, like if I was going to go leave and do this, it had to be something that I was excited enough about working on for like 5, 7, 10 years. And then even in a world where it didn't end up becoming this like large thing that I envisioned, that it was worth the attempt because it actually meant that much. And there are a few things that clear that bar, right? Like even businesses you thought could do really well, if you were selling, $50 million a year worth of widgets, like you're going to go through so much pain to sell that amount of widgets that like personally for me, it just oddly wouldn't be worth it. And so I didn't walk into venture thinking I was going to be an entrepreneur. I didn't walk into consulting thinking I was going to be an entrepreneur. I certainly had, versions of this idea that were interesting to me even back in those days, but it ended up being a confluence of getting really passionate about this specific idea, the team I was going to go build it with, and the opportunity that became clearer and clearer to me the more time I spent in these industries that led it to be something worth pursuing.
And what made you go from consulting to investing? And I may ask, also I worked at Deloitte and as a management consultant in strategy and operations. So I'm just curious. I'm always curious to see someone who makes the shift into investing. What was the reason? What drove them?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I entered consulting, I knew it was going to be a great place to gain a bunch of like foundational skills for my career. I thought it was going to be a great place to meet a bunch of other really smart people and learn from them, and also give me a wide range of exposure to business problems. I kind of came in and I wasn't at least totally sure even from the beginning that I wanted to be a lifelong consultant. And over time, I think that became clearer and clearer to me. I think I enjoyed like learning about a bunch of different problems, but I wanted to essentially go from that to having real skin in the game, for lack of a better term, in both directions. And so working either in a business is one way of getting skin in the game, and I certainly feel like there's plenty of skin in 4Degrees. Another way to do that is to actually put money behind kind of the company where you believe it has a real shot of success. And so investing was one of those paths for me. And me specifically, like when I recognized that I wanted to have more skin in the game, so to speak, and I knew that I wanted it to be in emerging technologies and emerging companies because that's where a lot of the job growth and economic creation that economic development had always been exciting to me. Um, I recognized that unless I found something I was really excited about working on for the long term, didn't make sense for me to like jump specifically into a company. And so I was lucky enough to get a shot at getting an opportunity to see a lot of different companies at once while still getting that skin in the game. And that's what investing was.
Got it. And how did being an investor start and change your view or affect you as a founder starting a company? How did it help or how did it hurt you?
Yeah, so I'd say it helped in that one, it gave me a base of kind of connections and relationships that have been certainly powerful for our ability to raise capital, but also in terms of like company building in general. And so that's been amazing. The second is if you do choose to fundraise, it does give you a pretty good understanding of how investors think. And so I found that to be certainly helpful, both in assessing our own business, but also when you go and have those kinds of conversations. And so those two experiences, I would say, were probably the most formative or like the most helpful elements of that job. There's also getting a chance to see different companies execute in different ways and learning a little bit from those. I would say though that like ultimately being an investor doesn't like help you with like the hardest things of being an entrepreneur. So hiring and motivating really great people, dealing with really difficult situations and finding kind of the courage, strength, et cetera, to keep going. Firing people when it doesn't work out. Like those aren't typically things you get as like a mid-career investor, and those are things that as an entrepreneur, like some of them make or break like defining things you have to do. And so a lot of those things, I don't think you get any other way of like experiencing other than to go do it and to fail and to feel the pain and to find your way to navigate through it.
That's great. That's like the true the true. What are some of the biggest challenges that you faced in starting 4 Degrees?
Yeah, I mean, the challenges for us, I feel like there are going to be typical challenges in most startups, right? So like finding a great team to join you very early on the journey when there aren't a ton of proof points. There isn't a lot of money in the bank, right? There isn't so much revenue that makes this like a incredibly obvious thing to go pursue. All of that stuff is hard. And I mean, we've been lucky to pull together a phenomenal team today, but that's going to continue to be difficult to do until the business becomes increasingly obvious, right? What else is hard? I mean, the early versions of building the startup and building the product itself, you're naturally, the MVP one you build isn't going to be like the product that works, right? And so plenty of iteration, plenty of excitement on launch day, followed by, we got a lot of work to do. Like those moments, yeah, they're painful. They're not the most fun moments in the world, but ultimately they're the things that teach you, and you learn so much from every experiment, every step along the way. And for us, it's ended up being a really big accelerant to our growth to be willing to get out there and kind of deal with the lumps.
I'm sure the the cost of living, the burn is a little bit lower in Chicago than it is on the coast. But can you share more around what why did you choose Chicago to build your company?
Yeah, so I mean, part of it was we were already here in Chicago, and so I mean, for a relationship-driven company, like being in a place where you have a number of relationships already is certainly impactful. But even putting that to the side, I do think Chicago has a bunch of fundamentally like strong things about its startup ecosystem. The first is what you mentioned, which is that you can make money stretch far more easily here. Like the amounts you're paying in like office rents or even in like salaries are going to be materially different here in Chicago than they would be in San Francisco or Los Angeles or New York. And so you can take what seems like a modest like pre-seed round in San Francisco and actually stretch that for seed round levels of runway here in Chicago. The second is that there is like a material talent pool here. And I mean that both on like the kind of engineering side, where you have a bunch of like Midwestern engineering schools for which Chicago can't be based, but also from a like biz ops and marketing and the like side, because of all the large corporations and the like who are in the area, some of the best business schools in the world as well. And so you can kind of leverage that talent pool to help grow the business. And I think because it ends up being a little bit less of a competitive and large startup ecosystem, I think that also means that you don't deal with the same level of like poaching difficulties I think you'd see from a company on the coasts. And so certainly we've seen those to be big advantages for us. The third, which I somewhat highlighted in the second, is that because you have this proximity to these large corporations, I think particularly for a B2B company, it's easier to have the level of proximity to people's real problems. And so I think that leads to companies in Chicago generally building for what are like real challenges that corporations and companies have, rather than kind of speculating and then trying to go figure out where the real issues may lie. So a bunch of good reasons to build in Chicago. Chicago isn't all roses either, but I think in general the pros outweighs the cons.
I was gonna say you're selling Chicago. It's great. But as long as they don't experience the what is it, the Arctic vortex or whatever they call it, the winters there.
You can see I'm on a beach. This is weather update.
That's right. Summers in Chicago are amazing. That is for sure. Hands down. They don't look quite like your background, but they're pretty good. Um,
Are you
uh,
accusing me of fake news here? I'm just playing.
oh yeah, right. Hey, can you share a little bit more about you or are right a global shaper, that impact. There's an impact vein there, and that's something important to us at Rebel One. So can you share a little bit more about why did you join the World Economic Forum as a global shaper, and how does that impact your how you do business at 4 Degrees?
Yeah. So the reason why I joined is, I think, twofold. The first is it's a set of young professionals in the city who are all focused on like how you make Chicago and the cities that they live in the world like better places to live in and better places in the world more broadly. And that's something that's personally dear to me. Like I care a lot about the impact that the things that I do, the people that I associate with have in the world. And so finding other like-minded, ambitious, but yet like socially focused professionals is something that I had a lot of appreciation for. And then the second, and I guess somewhat unsurprisingly, given the nature of our business, is I believe in building relationships with other like good people. And I found a set of folks who are part of Shapers in Chicago and also globally to be, fundamentally both very capable people, but also very like kind and like well-meaning people. And so those are the kinds of folks I want more of in my life.
That's great. And how do you feel that lens has an impact on your business, or if it does at all?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I probably could leverage or at least like spend more time thinking through how these two things are connected. I imagine there have been some probably already benefits to like people who I've met through global shapers who've made introductions or who, honestly just been like a friend throughout the process of building a company. But yeah, I haven't like directly wound those two efforts together in any way. It's just been more organic to the extent that it's kind of been complementary.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have a few friends in the Shapers program. Noticed the vein of wanting to do good for the world. It impacts some of the rest of their decisions and what they focus on. For you, as you look at as COVID pushes more business to be done virtually. How is that either how's that impacting your business, positive or negative?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I almost put, well, I'll step back, I'll step away from the philosophical side for a moment. So if you think specifically for our business, I'd say two things, and they're probably two countervailing forces. So the first is that you have a global pandemic that is killing businesses left and right, unfortunately, and that is kind of freezing spend in certain departments, forcing people to lose jobs. And so I think in general, that has like a macroeconomic effect that like hurts most companies, right? And so we're certainly not totally immune to that. On the other hand, if you think about where people did a lot of their like relationship building and relationship maintenance and connectivity, historically, a lot of that was offline, right? You'd run into someone at an event. Where you believe that if you just kind of hung out in places like 1871 that we were talking about before, that you'd eventually run into people and that would be an easy enough way of maintaining that connectivity. And now naturally in 2020, with all of us sitting and doing these meetings from our homes or in remote locations, you can't rely on that serendipity of being in the same physical location as like a way of maintaining those relationships. And so we found people needing to be a lot more intentional about how they tried to structure that time and ensure that the ties that mattered to them and to their businesses remained intact. And so because of that, we've seen more and more interest in like digital and online solutions to maintaining and understanding that connectivity. And so we've actually seen a fair bit of interest in 4 Degrees as a result of it, because we focus on giving you a bunch of those tools to help you kind of maintain, strengthen, grow those relationships, understand connectivity across a team in ways that are actually really hard to do without some sort of centralized way, which is what we provide.
Yeah, I've been talking to a few one investors and entrepreneurs about the future of work, and really talking about where, and I'll turn it over to you as to the question is where do you see the trends and areas of opportunity for other entrepreneurs that are looking in the space, and what we were looking at specifically is that, like you said, there's not as much serendipitous interaction. Everybody's leaning on Zoom and email and Slack, and saying this is exhausting because it doesn't replace everything that we do, from the water cooler talk to to just even being in a conference room, right? It's a little bit more cumbersome of an experience, not necessarily very like robust. The feedback loops are longer, so not always great for idea generation, and what have you. But going back to you, is where do you think the areas of opportunity are now, since this is the virtual relationships are what you focus on?
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, the amount of opportunity that exists in the future of work, which is a massive space naturally, is broad, right? I do think there's everything from just modernizing a set of tools that we all use today that are all really bad. Like there's a lot of old software out there that are being used very heavily in a day to day that lack intelligence, that lack an understanding of what you're trying to accomplish. I think are all like direct ways that entrepreneurs can go and build interesting solutions. I think there's also just, I think with any characteristic or of humans, there's like a bell curve, right? And so no one solution is going to be perfect for everyone. And so I think in the same way you've seen, a proliferation of like to-do lists or, database tools like Notion and Coda and the like, you're going to see a similar level of explosion, I think, across most other kinds of solutions, because people like to work in different ways and are going to want to gravitate towards solutions that are probably fit the way they work a little bit better. And so I think being an entrepreneur, there's no better time to build like a software product, particularly in the enterprise or future workspace than today. The last thing I'd say is I'm personally, and maybe the nature of our company, I'm a huge believer that machine learning and artificial intelligence is going to be infused into most sorts of business applications over time. And if you think about what those products or what that technology is particularly good at, it's good at kind of getting rid of a lot of the mundane, like data entry and other like repetitive tasks that historically humans have needed to spend a lot of time doing. And over time, AI is actually getting more and more creative. And so it's going to move further and further up like that quote unquote cognitive stack, so to speak. But I think the one thing that AI is going to take the longest time to actually do really well is try to replace a lot of the kind of human to human connection that we're having in conversations like this. And so I think a lot of the future of work is going to be about how you amplify the things that humans are uniquely good at. And so that's part of the reason why I'm excited about our company and companies like us, is that that's the kind of bet we're making, is that authenticity and human connection is going to be something that long-term wins.
And shifting to, I wanted to dive into the point that we talked about earlier, or just about raising. So on a different topic, so shifting a little bit, you've raised over $1 million for 4Degrees, a tough thing to do, especially in this environment. Can you talk a little bit, candidly, so some of our audiences is there's early stage investors, but also aspiring founders that are looking to go down the path. So what made you decide that you're gonna I'm definitely going to go down the fundraising path, and what were some of the things you did to help you achieve that milestone?
Yeah. So in terms of deciding if we wanted to raise it all, I think part of it is a question of what it is you're trying to build on what time frame. And so for us, we believed that one, the opportunity we were going after, which in our minds is nothing less than like reinventing the way the world thinks about and manages its professional relationships, was a large enough kind of ambition and goal to be a large independent public company should be essentially achieve that mission. And so that meant that the scope kind of aligned with what the scope of what venture is meant to do and meant to help accomplish. And then the second is, as a result of building that kind of business, it's one that has a bit of momentum and a bit of a network effect around it. And so what that means is like any additional customer, any additional user you get makes the product better, faster, build the competitive moat around it. And so that's the kind of business that benefits from speed, right? From a little bit of aggression to try to get to market and grow rapidly. And that also kind of ties back to this venture kind of trajectory and time frame. And so putting those two things together that led us to believe that venture was the right path for our business. There are plenty of other great businesses for whom either conditions one or two don't hold, in which case, like, I don't know that I would raise. I think raising actually has a bunch of difficulty that comes with this path that I think a lot of folks may either gloss over or have less of an appreciation for. And so I think venture is essentially a tool to be used to achieve a specific end. And if that doesn't align with your ends, then it may be worth reconsidering. So that's probably what I would say in terms of why someone should choose to raise or not raise. In terms of what helped us get ready to raise and do that, I do think one, understanding our connectivity to potential investors was really helpful. And being able to identify the folks who invested in the kinds of businesses that like represented us at the stage we invested, and ideally that could bring real value to our business. And so we used a bunch of your standard tools. So whether it was searching online or your Crunchbases and PitchBooks and the like to try to build up that list, we used our own product to try to understand our connectivity to the folks on that list, made the warm introductions. And then from there, it was a lot of kind of pitching and persistence and deck building and getting feedback and iterating. And so I think in some ways, fundraising is almost like company building, in that you have to be willing to listen to the feedback you're getting from the market, but at the same time have a level of conviction in what it is that you're trying to build, and dancing that line or kind of holding that line is always tricky.
Well, that's great insight. What are some of the things, before you said there's some things that come with accepting venture funding that may influence your business? Can you share with the audience what some of those things were for you all?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think probably the biggest example is, when you accept venture money, you are choosing to go along a very specific trajectory, right? So your goal is to essentially take that capital, likely deploy it within like an 18 to 24-month period. And within that period, have grown your business to such an extent that your business is probably worth 3 or 4 times the amount it was like 18, 24 months ago, right? And so to do that, that's rapid hiring, that's aggressively selling, it's long hours, it's a lot of things that a lot of like, and I don't mean this in any way, it's just hard. It's not the same path as choosing to run the business and in a way that kind of suits your lifestyle and what you're trying to accomplish. Like, you are choosing to go along a path that ideally has your business being a public company or worth, in the billions in a 10-year period or a 7-year period. And that just requires, a very different set of assumptions around how you hire, how quickly you hire, how aggressively you expand, spending money very, very rapidly and very quickly. Like, all of those things come with this path. And they're not, it's not always for the faint of heart.
I love that. I remember having a conversation with an investor, and he said you put rocket fuel in rocket ships. You could put rocket fuel in a car, but the car might blow up, and that's you don't want your startup to blow up. Just understanding what type of vehicle you want it to be as you're building out. So
there are probably a lot of great businesses that, had they not taken venture funding or taken as much venture funding, would have turned out to be phenomenally successful. And because they did, they ended up like needing to sell for pennies on the dollar or maybe liquidating entirely. And I think it's related to this point, like understanding what your ambitions are, but also like the kind of business you're building has a lot of implications whether you should accept venture money or not.
And when you were building out, you talked about being lucky and building out an amazing team. What were some of the things you look for in building out your team related to that?
Yeah, so the biggest thing for me and I think for our team, we have like a set of values that we talk about that are on the website and everything. Some of the ones we care most about are going to be one, customer centricity. So we care a lot about listening to our customers, like to the point where we start all our team meetings with like customer feedback. We try to be incredibly responsive on like intercom and all the other channels. And so that's one where if someone comes in the interview process, we get a gauge that like they don't kind of orient towards customer first, chances are they're not going to be a great fit with us. The second is growth. And we mean that along a bunch of different dimensions. So one is So going back to this idea of being a startup and startup needing to grow very rapidly, we take the growth of our company very seriously. But that also means that the people in any given role need to be able to grow themselves very quickly, because otherwise, the job you're doing today will not be the same job 6 months from now. And it certainly won't be the same job a year from now, because our company is growing rapidly, it's expanding. And so what's going to be required of someone who, leads sales today or leads engineering today is going to be very different than the person who what we need from them in 12 months. And so if we don't have people who've shown a proclivity to, or a bunch of habits around how they try to grow and how they improve themselves, they probably aren't going to be the right fit for us. The third is, as a kind of Black founder, I care a lot about the diversity of our team, not just demographically, although that is an important factor, of course, but also in terms of how people think and their life experiences. I think that fundamentally leads to better products and better decisions. And so if someone else doesn't hold the same values, particularly if they're in a position where they're going to be hiring other folks, chances are they're not the right fit for us either.
Great. No, I appreciate that. So if you were to take a step back, and before you started this journey, you know, uh, it's been about 3 years. What's a piece of advice you would have given yourself right before you started? Maybe pre-Techstars.
It's a great question. Pre-Techstars, advice I would have given myself would have been, honestly, always index on great people, right? And I think the reason why I say that is when you are a startup without a lot of money, it becomes very easy to try to make trade-offs on solving for what you need in that moment, rather than thinking about all of the impacts that any given person who joins you in the earliest days will have on your company, not just today, but for the culture for the long run. And so I would always if you have the difference between hiring someone who you think is good and can do today's job at X, or someone who you think is phenomenal and could be a huge driver for the business at 1.4x or 1.5x, spend the extra money.
Awesome. No, that's great insight. Um, before we close, if you can share what's next for 4 Degrees.
Yeah. So we're really excited to just continue growing and expanding into these sets of relationship-driven industries. And so I think the next big step in our path is going from being a business that today enables you to share your network with your team to actually being able to share your network outside of your team. So in other words, allowing the fellow travelers that surround your business to be able to easily contribute their networks towards your success and vice versa. So I know that sounds a little bit cryptic, but I will have a lot more on that product announcement soon.
Well, thank you. This is Rebel1 Live for everyone watching. This is Ablorde, Ashigbi, that is founder and CEO of 4 Degrees. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. Thank you.
Of course. And please join us on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 7 p.m. to hear from more amazing CEOs and VCs at Rebel1 Live. Thanks again. Have a good night.